The following video is about standards and how loose they are allowed to be in various things, for instance, engineering, designs, etc. Before we got to the point of the Industrial Revolution allowing us to very slowly and incrementally make better and better quality, fine-tuned 1 part in 1,000 or 1 part in 10,000 dimensional, standards. Everything was handmade and made to just fit together, sometimes with ridiculous levels of precision, like crazy levels, but there were one-offs in most cases. The more precise something is, the more unique it usually is. However, some things are left very, very vague because they're deliberately rounded off. For instance, in firearms, a 357 Magnum cartridge has to fit the chamber exactly right in a small pistol. Everything has to fit as tight as possible, but be able to be removed. Therefore, there has to be some cheat done, because if it was too precise, you'd never get the cartridge back out, and everything would be very tightly sealed, but the cartridge would take more effort to get out. That involves doing something simple like tapering it. A certain ideal amount of tapering is done for each type of material, and whether it's solid or hollow. The bullet can have a taper to it that would be advantageous for extracting a live round, but you get the idea. The cartridge being hollow, it can expand more. There's a bunch of engineering going on. When it comes to shotguns, the standards aren't. The difference between European Union CIP standards and American saami and, quote, old industry standards that were based on doing British proof testing and dimensions, which had a lot of variation between, counties, definitely between the United States and Britain, was because there isn't a precision requirement except to make sure the damn thing works. If you stuck with muzzle loaders, there never had to be a standard because you were just packing things in by cramming it with a blunt stick. Now, one of the weird ones is that, if you're not aware of it, one of the things I like muttering under my breath and sometimes live in videos is a huge number of shotguns are just based on whatever hunk of pipe was available. 4-gauge is the best example. And examples of standards that would be mathematically escalated but aren't, because the 4-gauge shell isn't the right dimensional change compared to the bore diameter it's supposed to be, and almost none of them are the right bore diameter because they're not. And there's a whole bunch of very interesting rabbit hole, waste your time stories, unless you're into it like me, because I'm weird, that you can look up for it. But we're going to do one here that's simple. Black Powder Express 577. Now, the bullet diameter, the bullet going into the gun, is .584. So you have a 58 caliber bullet, 58 plus, going into slightly under 58 caliber bore. That's the way it's supposed to be, because you make the bore a certain diameter and you cut grooves into it in a spiral for it to be a rifle. That's what the rifling's for. Gets it to spin. And the bullet almost inevitably is a little bit bigger. And depending on the material, again, material science here, it's going to be a great deal of difference or very little. And unless you have the groove, land, average, and bullet diameters, you don't know all the details, and I'm not going to look it up because it's not relevant here. What we're going to be doing here is the case. Now, you can look up videos if you look up 577 Black Powder Express or something similar to it. This is the most similar to a question I got today. It's not the one necessarily. It isn't. Had a bullet that, if you measure it in millimeters, just to completely destroy our ability to be stuck in inches, 14.8 millimeter. Now, we could round that up to 15 millimeter if we're talking about a shotgun, but we're not supposed to, right? The neck diameter of the cartridge is 15.4. Base diameter at the other end of it, right before the rim, is 16.8 millimeter. And it's 18.5 millimeter for the rim to keep it from sliding in too deep, so it'll have proper head spacing. Now, most cartridges like this out of a rifle, pistol, whatever, are based on either the rim being the limiting factor to get it to the right setting, headspace, or the mouth of the case, or other. It could be the shoulder diameter as it necks down. In this case, it's not necking down. Case length in this was up to 3 inches, but there was a 2.5-inch version of it. You could call it 577 Black Powder Express short. Okay? Now, European Union dimensions and diameters usually entirely done in millimeters and then converted to inch from a standard that was called gauge. Gauge is an extremely rounded off number. It's a loosey-goosey thing because it's usually used for firing shot. The closest it comes to is 24 gauge. This one has a caliber, I'm going to round it off because we're going to call it a caliber, for the bore diameter without grooves being done of 0.58 inches. Now the bullet diameter for the Black Powder Express is 0.584. So it's a little underboard. But that's the European Union version of it. In the case of the US chambering, it's 0.579. Just to be pedantic, apparently. Yeah, it's 58 caliber. Okay, it's a 58 caliber gun in all cases. But that's the bullet diameter. Yes, exactly. And yes, if the bullet is 58, then the bore diameter for the Black Powder Express should be smaller. So it's already being shoved into something smaller. Having it almost exactly the right size, it's a little bit bigger. We're about right here. Right? Okay, let's continue. What about the neck diameter? Well, the European Union has a standard for chamber or cartridge, and the diagrams are, seriously, the European Union, CIP out of France, their diagrams are atrocious. Digging out what they really meant and finding out that they make a regularly annoying number of mistakes typing in the wrong number or putting them in the wrong column. Instead of just diagramming out the damn thing and just giving it a single name, it has B, B prime, B subset, sub B. No, just A through Z, like everybody else on the planet, you stupid bastards. But let's move on. The neck diameter, which is the smallest end of the cartridge in most cases, 16.45 millimeters. The Black Powder Express is 15.4, so it's literally too small, which means if you were to take the cartridge and shove it into the shotgun, the case might split as it opens up. But then again, shotguns don't care. But if you wanted to take these chambers, these cases for a shotgun, and make them in there, you'd have to literally just jam it into the chamber before you reloaded it and get it pounded into shape and make it fit. Or use that as a way to crimp it shut at the end or whatever. But it would work as long as it's brass and you anneal it. Let's move on. The base of the European Union version of it is 16.75 millimeter. Again, they're using millimeters for everything except mentioning caliber, which is inch based. Okay, 16.75 for the base diameter. And the base diameter is 16.8, almost 17 millimeters. So the base diameter of the shell is too big. And then finally the rim is 18.45. The rim diameter for the Black Powder Express is 18.5. That's the closest you can get. Now we'll look up the American standard, because the American standard is literally a completely different cartridge. Might just as well be. Just because you can stick it in doesn't mean you should put it there. Let's move on. U.S. chambering, bore diameter. Again, bore diameter is still 0.58. In fact, it's almost identical. There's no reason to argue here. That's the shotgun. And it's going to be smaller than if you were to stick a Black Powder Express cartridge in. It would squeeze it in. And if you're not aware of it, well, it would cause a pressure spike, especially if this is like an elephant gun kind of cartridge. If it was one of the short 2.5 inches, which, by the way, that's what the chamber length is for the shotgun, by definition, if you could jam it in there, it would actually be low enough pressure you could probably get away with it. Let's talk about the next part, the neck. 0.65. It's 0.649, but it's 0.65 in American standard. This is the chamber dimensions. And again, the neck diameter, if it's in inches, is smaller. Basically 0.61, it expands out violently to 0.65. You're going to have more of an expansion if you took this Black Powder Express elephant gun cartridge and stuck it into a 24 gauge gun. And again, if you started off with empty 24 gauge shot shells, you could jam it into the elephant gun. Okay. Base diameter, 0.66. Okay. And the base diameter, again, for the Black Powder Express, we're doing that, is 0.66. The European Union one is vastly different compared to the American standard, or the American standard is more loose. The rim diameter is 0.73 or 0.728. Basically, it would just barely start falling through the interior of a 12 gauge, because 12 gauges are around, unless it's the apparently American standard is always smaller for some reason. That doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be bigger, not smaller. 73 caliber is approximately 12 gauge. It's actually just a bit under. So this would literally fall in a true 12 gauge bore. It would definitely fall through at the rim. The cartridge would just drop through if it was a 24 gauge. Not dangerous because it would fly out the barrel if it got stuck, and it would just fall through and not get stuck, except at the choke where it go and you'd get that Elmer Fudd explosion looking thing. Anyway, the rim diameter, again, for the Black Powder Express is .728. This is literally identical. Now, what does that tell you? Number one, the European Union using millimeters, they started with inches. It's bullshit. It's a 28 gauge. A 24 gauge, excuse me. Next, the 24 gauge chambering. It's a 577 Black Powder Express bore out. The chamber ream used on a hunk of pipe that had approximately a 58 caliber interior. I'll leave you to look up the pipe diameter of this match too. Yeah, Americans and even the Brits just took off-the-shelf pipes and then expanded them if needed. Otherwise, they left them to where they would go to the correct bore diameter and then either press fit while it was red hot so it would form a really good chamber, or just drill that out, which is what most people did, because shotgun shells are really minimal. If it was the rifle type, they would definitely forge it over a mandrel for the entire depth of it to get it dead on perfect, and then rifle it. That's how they did it. It's not hammer forged. They heat the thing up to red hot, stick it in a thing, bash it in really violently, pop it back out, heat it up some more, put it back in, and then jam a mandrel into it till it bottoms out, pull it out, and then cut off the excess and then say good enough, and then charge you 10 times what it is. Because it's just, the 577 is a slightly necked down version of a 24 gauge. Conclusion. It really is. The fact that, I'm sorry, but the French and the British explicitly going out of their way to avoid making shit compatible sometimes by insisting on doing conversion error bingo from inch to millimeters. Britain started off with inches for all guns. They did. They switched to metric a long time ago, but they kept the rounding error. If you're not aware of it, millimeters are more precise than inches. 1 part in 1,000 for an inch, that's 3 digits, is more precise as far as physical measurement. You actually get the physical error taken care of. Then that resolution is not anywhere near as good as using millimeters, as long as you go 2 digits past the decimal point, 14.8 something. But if you round it, it's even more loosey-goosey. And again, when it comes to shotguns, it doesn't matter as much. But they keep making an error in it. And yes, I love being pedantic to the people who are like, me. You're using CIP standards, aren't you? So, well, they rounded off and created errors on purpose just so they could round it off to an error size so people could use millimeters for everything, and it was part of their metric system conversion a long time ago, long before America ever had a hissy fit over it. And it's one of the reasons, even though I'm going to say it for a fact, using thousandths of an inch is worse resolution and worse quality control than using hundredths of a millimeter. Go look up the conversion. It really is correct. No, it's just an objective fact. It is better. The fact that even the European Union standard for CIP for fucking rifles and shotguns keeps doing rounding errors to be pissy. Well, you don't know that? Yes, I do. It is. It's trivial for them to do the precision. And the thing is, for rifles, it's really important. For shotguns, who cares? Most of it's based on you using the expansion force in the cartridge to act as the gasket and the rim on the back gasket for shotgun shells. And it's also the reason you can get away with using literally Hunko pipe technology to make a 12 gauge, 28 gauge, whatever. And I'll put below, if I can find out which piece of tubing, as it's called, if it's more precision and more regular, or pipe, if you're just going to use it to build stuff and maybe have water, go through a building or whatever, oil, gas, water, whatever. I'll put that information in there. But yeah, quite literally, the whole idea here is, yeah, it was just basically the same thing. Obviously, they needed to neck it down for the bullet. That's what they did. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yeah, they're almost a direct equivalent, only for 2.5 inch length, and that self-limits the pressure range and pressure spike. Anything else, off the table. And again, I'm not an expert. Don't listen to me. And yes, 24 gauge is almost unheard of these days. So it doesn't matter much, right?